The rope bit into Adelaide's palms like a living thing as she hauled another bucket of water from the well. The Arizona sun beating down mercilessly on the dusty yard outside the boarding house in Naco. August 1882 had brought drought and desperation to this border town, and with it, more work than one woman could handle. Her father had died 3 months ago from cholera, leaving her alone with his debts and the ramshackle boarding house that barely kept food on the table. At 19 years old, Adelaide Kimball had become intimately familiar with the kind of exhaustion that settled into your bones and refused to leave. She poured the water into the enormous washing tub, where sheets from the 6 occupied rooms soaked in lye soap. The laundry alone took 4 hours each day, but that was nothing compared to the cooking, the cleaning, the constant mending of linens worn thin by hard use. Her hands were already raw from scrubbing floors that morning, the skin cracked and peeling from the harsh soap and relentless work. But the sheets needed washing, and there was no one else to do it. Adelaide plunged her hands into the scalding water and began to scrub. The lye burned in the cracks of her skin, but she gritted her teeth and kept working. The boarders expected clean sheets, and if she lost any more customers, she would lose the house entirely. The bank had already extended her father's loan twice, but Mr. Henderson had made it clear there would be no third extension. She had until October to pay what was owed, or she would be out on the street. The sun climbed higher as she worked, sweat dripping down her face and stinging her eyes. Her dress clung to her back, the faded blue cotton dark with moisture. She scrubbed until her arms ached, until her shoulders screamed in protest, until the skin on her palms split open and blood mixed with the soap and water. Still, she kept working. There were 12 sheets to wash, and she had only finished 6. Adelaide was wringing out the 7th sheet when her vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to clear her sight, but black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her hands were on fire now, every movement sending sharp pains up her arms. She looked down and saw blood dripping from her palms, the cracks in her skin deep and angry red. The soap had eaten away at the raw flesh until there was nothing left but pain. She swayed on her feet, catching herself against the edge of the washing tub. Just a few more sheets. Just a little longer. She reached for the next piece of linen, but her hands were shaking so badly she could not grasp it. Blood smeared across the white fabric, ruining it. "Madam, you need to stop." The voice came from behind her, deep and concerned. Adelaide spun around, nearly losing her balance, and found herself staring at a man she had seen around town, but never spoken to. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of sage in the desert. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, his hat pushed back on his head, and there was something in his expression that made her want to cry. "I'm fine," she said automatically, even as fresh blood dripped from her fingertips. "I have work to finish." "No, madam, you're not fine." He stepped closer, and she could see the lines around his eyes, the sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. He was perhaps 25, maybe a year or two older, with the solid build of a man who made his living with his hands. "You're bleeding all over those sheets and you look like you're about to fall over." "I said I'm fine." Adelaide turned back to the washing tub, determined to prove him wrong, but the moment she plunged her hands back into the water, the pain was so intense that a sob escaped her throat. She jerked her hands out, cradling them against her chest, and felt tears spill down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. "That's enough." The cowboy's voice was gentle but firm. He moved to her side and carefully took her elbow, guiding her away from the tub. "Come on. Let's take care of those hands." "I don't even know you," Adelaide protested weakly, but she was too tired and hurt to resist. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, and the pain in her hands was making her nauseated. "Name's Isaac Jensen," he said, leading her to the covered porch where a rough wooden bench sat in the shade. "I've been boarding at the Lucky Star down the street for the past month, working cattle for Mr. Patterson. I've seen you around town, seen how hard you work. Figured it was only a matter of time before something like this happened." He settled her on the bench and then disappeared into the boarding house before she could respond. Adelaide sat there, dazed and aching, staring at her ruined hands. The palms were a mess of torn skin and blood, the cracks so deep she could see the raw flesh beneath. How had she let it get this bad? She had been so focused on getting the work done that she had not noticed how damaged her hands had become. Isaac returned with a basin of clean water, strips of cloth, and a small jar that she recognized as the salve Mrs. Chen at the general store sold for burns and cuts. He knelt in front of her, his movements careful and deliberate, and gestured for her hands. "This is going to hurt," he warned, "but we need to clean them properly." Adelaide nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She held out her hands, and Isaac began to gently wash away the blood and soap, his touch so light she could barely feel it. Even so, the pain was intense, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. He worked in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration, and there was something oddly intimate about the moment that made Adelaide's heart beat a little faster despite the pain. When her hands were clean, he dried them with a soft cloth and then opened the jar of salve. The ointment was cool and soothing against her raw skin, and Adelaide felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as the pain began to ease slightly. Isaac applied it with the same gentle care, making sure to cover every crack and cut, and then wrapped her hands in clean bandages. "There," he said, sitting back on his heels. "That should help. But you can't do any more work today. Those hands need time to heal." "I don't have time," Adelaide said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The sheets need to be finished, and I have to prepare dinner for the boarders, and the floors in the hallway need sweeping, and I'll do it." She stared at him. "What?" "I'll finish the laundry and whatever else needs doing," Isaac said, standing up and brushing off his pants. "You need to rest those hands or they'll never heal properly, and if they don't heal, you won't be able to work at all." "You can't do that. You don't work here." "I'm offering to help, Miss Kimball. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it." He looked at her with those sage green eyes, and Adelaide felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight since her father died. Kindness. When was the last time someone had shown her genuine kindness? "I don't understand why you would do this," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Isaac was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dusty yard and the washing tub full of half-finished laundry. "My mother ran a boarding house in Texas," he said finally. "After my father was killed by Comanche raiders when I was 12, she worked herself nearly to death trying to keep us afloat. I was too young to help much at first, and by the time I was old enough to make a real difference, the damage was done. She lived another 5 years, but she was never really well again. I swore then that if I ever saw another woman in that position, I would help if I could, so let me help you." The raw honesty in his voice made Adelaide's throat tighten. She looked at her bandaged hands and then at the work that still needed doing, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to accept that she could not do it all alone. "The sheets need to be rinsed and hung to dry," she said quietly. "And there are potatoes in the pantry that need peeling for dinner. The boarders expect their meal at 6. I can handle that." Isaac rolled up his sleeves and headed toward the washing tub. "You just rest." Adelaide watched him work, this strange cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. He moved with the easy competence of someone used to hard labor, hauling the heavy sheets out of the tub, and rinsing them in fresh water before wringing them out with strong hands. He hung them on the line to dry, the fabric snapping in the hot breeze, and then he brought her a cup of water before heading into the kitchen to tackle the potatoes. She sat on the porch in the shade, sipping the water and feeling as if she had stepped into some kind of dream. The pain in her hands was still there, a dull throb beneath the bandages, but it was bearable now. More than that, for the first time in 3 months, she was not working. She was simply sitting, watching someone else handle the endless tasks, and the relief was so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Isaac spent the rest of the afternoon working. He peeled potatoes and set them to boil, swept the hallway floor, and even mended a broken hinge on one of the bedroom doors. When the boarders came home at 6 o'clock, dinner was ready, and the table was set. They looked surprised to see a strange man serving their meal, but Adelaide explained that she had injured her hands and Isaac was helping out. The men nodded and dug into their food, too hungry to ask questions. After dinner, Isaac washed the dishes while Adelaide supervised from a chair in the kitchen, telling him where things went. It felt strange to be giving orders from a position of rest, but Isaac did not seem to mind. He worked with a quiet efficiency that spoke of practice, and by the time the kitchen was clean, the sun had set and the evening air had cooled slightly. "Thank you," Adelaide said as Isaac dried his hands on a towel. "I don't know how to repay you for all this." "You don't need to repay me," Isaac said. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her at the small kitchen table. "But I do think we should talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "Those hands are going to take at least a week to heal, maybe longer. You can't do the kind of work you've been doing in that time, or you'll just make them worse. You need help, Miss Kimball, and not just for one day." Adelaide felt panic rising in her chest. "I can't afford to hire anyone. I'm barely keeping this place running as it is. My father left debts, and the bank is going to take the house if I don't pay by October. I've been trying to save every penny, but it's not enough. It's never enough." Isaac leaned forward, his expression serious. "What if I stayed on to help, just until your hands heal and you're back on your feet? I could do the heavy work, the washing and hauling and repairs. You could handle the cooking and managing, things that don't require your hands to be in soap and water all day. I told you, I can't afford to pay you. I'm not asking for pay. I'm asking for room and board. Mr. Patterson's job is winding down anyway, and I was going to need to find new lodging soon. I could stay here, help you get the place running smoothly, and in exchange, you give me a room and meals. It would actually save me money, since I wouldn't be paying for a room at the Lucky Star anymore." Adelaide stared at him, trying to find the catch, the hidden motive. But Isaac's gaze was steady and honest, and she could see no deception in his face. "Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. Maybe I'm tired of drifting from job to job with no real purpose," Isaac said quietly. "Maybe I see someone who needs help and actually has the opportunity to provide it. Or maybe I just think it's the right thing to do. Does the reason matter?" "It should matter," Adelaide thought. She should be suspicious of his motives, should turn him down and figure out how to manage on her own. But the truth was, she was so tired and her hands hurt so much, and the thought of not having to do everything alone was so tempting that she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "1 week," she said. "You can stay for 1 week while my hands heal. There's a small room on the first floor that you can use, but after that, we'll need to discuss a different arrangement." Isaac smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less weathered. 1 week. That's fair. I'll get my things from the Lucky Star tomorrow and move in." That night, Adelaide lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, her bandaged hands resting on her stomach. She could hear the familiar sounds of the boarding house settling around her, the creaks and groans of old wood, the snoring of Mr. Peterson in the room next door. But there was something different now, a shift in the air that she could not quite name. Isaac Jensen had walked into her life like a dust devil, unexpected and powerful, and Adelaide had the strangest feeling that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The next morning, Isaac arrived with a worn leather saddlebag containing all his worldly possessions. Adelaide showed him to the small room on the first floor, which had been her father's office before he died. There was a narrow bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror and a window that looked out on the yard. It was not much, but Isaac seemed pleased with it. "This will do just fine," he said, setting his bag on the bed. "Now, what needs doing first?" Adelaide had made a list the night before, lying awake and thinking about all the tasks that were piling up. The chicken coop needs mucking out, and there's a leak in the roof over the back bedroom that needs patching. Also, we're low on firewood, and I usually chop it myself, but she held up her bandaged hands. "I'll take care of all of it," Isaac said. "You just focus on healing." Over the next few days, Adelaide watched Isaac work with a growing sense of wonder. He rose before dawn and worked until after dark, tackling every task on her list, and several she had not even thought to mention. He repaired the leak in the roof, chopped enough firewood to last 2 weeks, and cleaned out the chicken coop so thoroughly that the birds seemed confused by their suddenly spacious home. He even fixed the broken handle on the water pump, which Adelaide had been struggling with for months. But it was not just the work that impressed her. It was the way Isaac moved through the boarding house, always aware of what needed doing next, always asking if there was anything else she needed. He was patient with the boarders, firm but friendly when Mr. Peterson complained about the potatoes being too soft, and quick to help old Mr. Grayson down the stairs when his rheumatism was acting up. Adelaide found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way his shoulders moved under his shirt when he chopped wood, the way he hummed tunelessly while he worked, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that anyone would feel warmly towards someone who had helped them so much. But she knew it was more than that. On the third day, while Isaac was outside mending a section of fence, Adelaide unwrapped her hands to check their progress. The salve had worked wonders, and the worst of the cracks were already beginning to close. The skin was still tender and pink, but the angry redness had faded, and she could flex her fingers without too much pain. She was rebandaging them when Isaac came in for lunch, his shirt dusty and his face streaked with sweat. He washed up at the kitchen pump and then sat at the table while Adelaide served him cold chicken and bread. "Your hands look better," he observed, nodding at the fresh bandages. "They are. That salve you used really helped. Another few days and I should be able to start taking on more work again." Isaac was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "Adelaide," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. It sent a little shiver down her spine. "I know we agreed on 1 week, but I've been thinking. What if I stayed on longer? Not just until your hands heal, but for a while. I could help you get this place properly running, maybe even help you earn enough to pay off that bank debt." Adelaide's heart thudded in her chest. "Isaac, I still can't afford to pay you. I'm not asking for pay. The room and board arrangement works fine for me, but I think we could make this place more profitable if we put our minds to it. You've got 6 rooms, but only 5 are occupied. If we cleaned up that empty room at the end of the hall, we could rent it out. And I've noticed the yard is big enough for a vegetable garden. We could grow our own food, save money on groceries, maybe even sell the surplus at the market." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "You've been doing this alone for 3 months, Adelaide, and you've been barely holding on. But you don't have to do it alone. Let me help you. Let me stay." Adelaide felt something warm and dangerous blooming in her chest. It would be so easy to say yes, to let this man stay and help her and make her feel like she was not alone in the world. But she was afraid too. Afraid of what it would mean, afraid of getting used to having him around only to have him leave. "Why do you really want to stay?" she asked quietly. "I need to know the truth, Isaac. Are you running from something? Are you in trouble?" Isaac met her gaze steadily. "I'm not running from anything, and I'm not in trouble with the law if that's what you're worried about. The truth is, I've been drifting for the past 5 years, ever since my mother died. I worked cattle drives, worked ranches, worked anywhere that would hire me. But I never stayed anywhere long because there was never a reason to stay. Until now. What's different now?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Adelaide could see him weighing his words. "You are," he said finally. "You're different. I see you working yourself to death trying to keep your father's legacy alive, and I admire that. You're strong and determined, and you don't give up even when things are impossible. And maybe I want to be part of something that matters, something more than just drifting from town to town. Maybe I want to help you succeed because I believe you deserve to." The honesty in his voice made Adelaide's breath catch. She had not expected such vulnerability, such raw truth. And she realized that somewhere over the past 3 days, she had started to trust this man, to rely on him in ways that went beyond just the physical work. "Okay," she said softly. "You can stay, but we need to make it a proper business arrangement. You work here, you get room and board, and when the place starts making more money, you get a share of the profits. Fair?" Isaac's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Fair." They shook on it, Adelaide's still bandaged hand small in his calloused grip, and she felt something shift between them, something that went beyond employer and employee, beyond helper and helped. It was the beginning of a partnership, and maybe, just maybe, something more. Over the next few weeks, Isaac proved true to his word. He cleaned out the empty room, repairing the broken window and giving the walls a fresh coat of whitewash. Within a week, they had a new boarder, a schoolteacher named Miss Barnes who paid her rent promptly and kept to herself. The extra income was enough to buy seeds for the garden, which Isaac planted in neat rows behind the house. He built a fence around it to keep out rabbits and chickens, and Adelaide tended the young plants in the cool of the evening, her healed hands gentle among the seedlings. The boarding house began to feel different, less like a burden and more like a home. Adelaide found herself humming while she cooked, found herself looking forward to meals when she and Isaac would sit together and talk about their days. He told her stories about his time on cattle drives, about sleeping under the stars and navigating by the North Star, about stampedes and river crossings and narrow escapes from rustlers. She told him about growing up in Naco, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father's dreams of making the boarding house successful, and how those dreams had died with him. They talked about everything and nothing, and Adelaide discovered that she loved the sound of Isaac's laugh, low and genuine, and the way he listened to her like every word she said mattered. She found herself noticing small things about him. The scar on his left hand from a branding iron accident, the way he always checked the locks on the doors before bed, the way he snuck treats to the stray dog that hung around the back porch. It was September when Adelaide realized she was in love with him. They were in the garden together, harvesting the first tomatoes, and Isaac said something funny that made her laugh so hard she nearly dropped the basket she was holding. He reached out to steady it, his hand covering hers, and their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and Adelaide felt the truth settle over her like a warm blanket. She loved him. She loved this cowboy who had walked into her life and made everything better, who worked beside her and believed in her and made her feel like she was not alone. But she did not say anything. How could she? Isaac had stayed to help her, not to court her. He had never indicated that his feelings went beyond friendship and mutual respect. And Adelaide was terrified of ruining what they had by speaking feelings that might not be returned. So she kept silent, and the days turned into weeks. The garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for the table and enough surplus to sell at the weekly market. The boarding house was full, all 6 rooms occupied, and Adelaide was actually saving money for the first time since her father died. The bank debt still loomed, but it no longer felt impossible. With Isaac's help, she might actually make it. It was late October, 3 days before the final loan payment was due, when everything changed. Adelaide was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard raised voices from the front of the house. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried out to find Isaac standing in the doorway, facing 2 rough-looking men she had never seen before. "I told you I don't want any trouble," Isaac was saying, his voice hard. "You need to leave." "We're not leaving without what we came for," one of the men said. He was tall and rangy with a cruel twist to his mouth. "You owe us, Jensen. You think you can just walk away from a debt." Adelaide's stomach dropped. "A debt? Isaac had a debt." "I don't owe you anything," Isaac said flatly. "That poker game was rigged and you know it. I'm not paying for your cheating." "You calling us cheats?" The second man stepped forward, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Them's fighting words, Jensen." Adelaide moved quickly, stepping between Isaac and the strangers. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you have a dispute with Mr. Jensen, you can settle it elsewhere. This is a respectable boarding house, and I won't have threats of violence under my roof." The tall man's eyes swept over her dismissively. "This ain't your business, lady. Step aside." "It is my business when you're standing in my house," Adelaide said, her voice sharp. "Now leave, or I'll fetch the sheriff." The men exchanged glances, and for a moment Adelaide thought they might actually draw their guns, but Isaac stepped forward, his presence solid and protective behind her. "You heard the lady. Leave now and there won't be any trouble. But if you don't, I'll make sure the sheriff knows you've been running crooked card games at the saloon. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear about that." The tall man's face darkened, but after a tense moment, he stepped back. "This ain't over, Jensen. You can't hide behind a woman's skirts forever." They left, their spurs jingling as they walked down the porch steps and into the dusty street. Adelaide waited until they were out of sight before turning to Isaac, her heart pounding. What was that about? Isaac ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "A couple weeks before I met you, I was playing poker at the saloon in town. I won a fair amount, but these 2 claimed I owed them more than I actually did. I knew the game was rigged in their favor, so I walked away. I thought that was the end of it, but apparently not." "Are you in danger?" "No," Isaac said firmly. "They're bullies and cheats, but they're not killers. They were trying to intimidate me into paying money I don't owe. I'm sorry they came here, Adelaide. I should have dealt with this before it reached your door." Adelaide studied his face, saw the genuine regret there, and felt her anger fading. "You should have told me you had trouble following you. I didn't think they'd come here, and I didn't want you to worry." He reached out and touched her arm gently. "Adelaide, I would never do anything to put you in danger. If I thought my staying here was a risk to you, I would leave right now." "Don't you dare," Adelaide said fiercely. "Don't you dare leave because of 2 con men trying to steal money from you. We'll go to the sheriff together and make a report. If they come back, they'll be arrested." Isaac looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something warm and wondering. "You're really something, you know that." Most women would have thrown me out the moment trouble showed up at the door. I'm not most women, Adelaide said. And you've done too much for me to abandon you the moment things get difficult. We're partners, remember. Partners, Isaac echoed, and the way he said it made Adelaide's heart skip. Yeah, we are. They went to the sheriff the next day and filed a report about the two men and their threats. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Rawlings, knew exactly who they were talking about. Jake Hartley and Pete Simmons, he said, spitting into a tin can on his desk. They've been running crooked games around town for a couple months now. I've been trying to catch them at it, but nobody wants to testify against them. You willing to stand up in court if it comes to that, Jensen? I am, Isaac said without hesitation. Good man. I'll have a talk with them, make it clear they're not welcome to harass honest folk. They give you any more trouble, you come straight to me. They left the sheriff's office feeling more secure, and Adelaide noticed that Isaac seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, and Adelaide found herself very aware of how close Isaac was walking beside her, how his arm occasionally brushed against hers. Thank you, Isaac said as they reached the front porch, for standing up for me back there. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Adelaide said. You've been standing up for me since the day we met. It's only fair I return the favor. Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing in the shade of the porch, hidden from the street, and the afternoon sun cast golden light across the dusty yard. Adelaide, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart began to pound. What is it? I didn't just stay here because I wanted to help with the boarding house, Isaac said. I mean, that's part of it, but it's not the whole truth. The truth is, from the moment I saw you that day with your hands bleeding and your stubborn determination to keep working despite the pain, I was drawn to you. And the more time I've spent here, the more I've gotten to know you, the stronger that feeling has become. He took a deep breath, his sage green eyes locked on hers. I'm in love with you, Adelaide. I have been for weeks now. And I know this might not be what you want to hear, and I know I'm just a drifting cowboy with nothing much to my name, but I had to tell you. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so intense it was almost painful. Isaac, she whispered, you're not just a drifting cowboy. You're the man who saved me when I was drowning. You're the man who saw me at my worst and stayed anyway. You're the man I wake up wanting to see every morning, and the last person I think about before I fall asleep. She reached up and cupped his face with her hand, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. I love you too. I think I have since that first day, but I was too afraid to admit it. Isaac's eyes blazed with emotion, and then he was pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her as if he would never let go. Adelaide buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him. Soap and leather and sun-warmed cotton, and felt like she had finally come home. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Adelaide kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past 2 months, and the kiss deepened, became something desperate and beautiful and full of promise. They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, and the world could have ended and Adelaide would not have cared. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast, and I know I should probably court you properly, but I can't imagine my life without you now. Marry me, Adelaide. Let me be your partner in everything, not just the boarding house." "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church at the edge of town, with the boarders and half of Naco in attendance. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Isaac had picked that morning. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that Adelaide felt her knees go weak. The wedding celebration was held in the yard of the boarding house, which Isaac had decorated with lanterns and ribbons. There was food and music and dancing, and Adelaide danced with her new husband under the stars, her head resting against his chest, and felt happier than she had ever thought possible. 2 days before the bank deadline, Adelaide and Isaac walked into Mr. Henderson's office with the full loan payment in cash. The banker counted it twice, looking faintly disappointed that he would not be foreclosing on the property after all, and handed them the deed to the boarding house. "It's really ours now," Adelaide said as they walked out into the bright November sunshine, "free and clear." "It was always yours," Isaac said, squeezing her hand. "I just helped you keep it." But that was not entirely true, and they both knew it. Together, they had transformed the boarding house from a failing business into a thriving one. The rooms were always full. The garden provided fresh produce year-round, and they had even expanded, converting the old shed into a 7th room for boarders. Adelaide handled the books and the cooking while Isaac managed the repairs and the heavy work, and they made a formidable team. But more than that, they had built a life together. They had turned the boarding house into a home filled with laughter and love, where travelers found a warm bed and a hot meal, where the lonely found companionship and the weary found rest. In the spring of 1883, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had stared at her for a long moment, and then he had let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. Their son was born in early December, a healthy boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Adelaide's father, and he became the light of their lives. Isaac was a devoted father, patient and gentle, and Adelaide would often find him in the nursery at night, holding their sleeping son and singing softly. The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. The boarding house continued to thrive, and they eventually bought the property next door, expanding into a proper hotel with 12 rooms and a dining room that served meals to townsfolk as well as travelers. Adelaide hired help for the heavy work, 2 young women from town who were grateful for the employment, and she and Isaac were able to spend more time with their growing family. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Lily born in 1885, and another son named James who arrived in 1887. The house was always full of noise and laughter, children running through the halls and guests sitting on the porch enjoying Adelaide's famous apple pie. Isaac built a swing in the big cottonwood tree in the yard, and on summer evenings the family would gather there, Isaac pushing the children while Adelaide watched from the porch, her heart full to bursting. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the children were asleep and the hotel was peaceful, Adelaide and Isaac would sit together on their porch and remember that day in August when he had found her working herself to death and had decided to help. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but the memory was still vivid, still precious. "You ever regret it?" Adelaide asked one such night, her head resting on Isaac's shoulder. "Giving up the cowboy life to settle down here?" "Not for a single second," Isaac said, kissing the top of her head. "I found something here worth more than all the adventure in the world. I found you. I found home." Adelaide smiled in the darkness, feeling the warmth of his arm around her and the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate and alone, working until her hands bled because she had no other choice. And she thought about the woman she had become, strong and successful and deeply loved. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Isaac whispered back. "Always." The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The desert night was cool and quiet, and inside the hotel their children slept safely in their beds. Adelaide closed her eyes and let the peace of the moment wash over her, grateful beyond words for the day a cowboy had walked into her life and changed everything. The years continued to roll by, gentle and full. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with repairs around the hotel, his small hands learning to hammer and saw under Isaac's patient instruction. Lily was spirited and bright, with a gift for charming the guests and a love of cooking that rivaled her mother's. Little James was the wild one, always exploring, always getting into mischief, but with such infectious joy that it was impossible to stay angry with him for long. By 1890, the Jensen Hotel, as it was now known, was the most respected establishment in Naco. Travelers came from as far as Tucson to stay there, drawn by the reputation for cleanliness, good food, and fair prices. Adelaide had expanded the dining room twice to accommodate the demand, and Isaac had built a stable in the back where guests could board their horses for a small fee. They had become pillars of the community, respected and admired. Adelaide sat on the school board and helped organize social events for the town, while Isaac served as a volunteer deputy when Sheriff Rawlings needed extra help. Their children attended the local school and played with the other town children, growing up with roots deep in the Arizona soil. One evening in late summer, as they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children had been put to bed, Isaac reached across the table and took Adelaide's hand. Her hands were no longer the ruined, bleeding things they had been that day in August so long ago. They were strong and capable, marked with the small scars of a life well lived but healthy and whole. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Isaac asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "When I offered to help you," Adelaide smiled. "I said I did not understand why you would do it. And I told you that I had sworn to help if I ever saw a woman in that position again," Isaac said. "But that was only part of the truth. The whole truth is that the moment I saw you, something in my chest just knew that you were different. Knew that you mattered. Knew that my life was about to change in ways I could not even imagine." Adelaide felt tears gather in her eyes. "I knew it too, I think. Even through the pain and the exhaustion, some part of me recognized you, recognized that you were meant to be in my life. We've built something beautiful, haven't we?" Isaac said softly, looking around at the dining room with its polished tables and pretty curtains, the sound of the hotel settling around them like a contented sigh. "Something that matters." "We have," Adelaide agreed. "And it all started because you saw someone who needed help and you chose to care. That one act of kindness changed everything." Isaac stood and pulled her to her feet, drawing her into his arms for a slow dance, even though there was no music. They swayed together in the quiet dining room, and Adelaide rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Isaac whispered back. "For trusting me, for loving me back, for making me a better man than I ever thought I could be." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the soft lamplight, two people who had found each other in the hardness of the desert and had created something green and growing and full of life. Outside, the night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant against the black sky. Inside, their children dreamed peacefully, safe and secure in the home their parents had built. And in that moment, Adelaide Kimball Jensen knew that she had everything she had ever wanted, everything she had ever needed. She had a home, a family, a successful business, and most precious of all, she had love. The kind of love that endures through hardship and celebrates in joy, the kind of love that builds legacies and spans lifetimes. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, when the hotel had expanded to 20 rooms and employed a dozen people from town, when Isaac's hair had gone silver and Adelaide's hands bore the marks of a long life well lived, they would still sit together on their porch in the evenings. They would hold hands and watch the sunset paint the Arizona sky in colors of fire and gold, and they would remember. They would remember a young woman working until her hands bled, driven by desperation and determination. They would remember a cowboy who saw someone in need and chose compassion over indifference. They would remember the moment their lives intersected and became intertwined, two separate paths merging into one. Thomas took over running the hotel when Isaac and Adelaide decided to retire in 1902, and he ran it with the same dedication and care his parents had shown. Lily married a rancher from outside town and had 5 children who loved visiting their grandparents in Naco. James became a lawyer and moved to Phoenix, but he came home every Christmas without fail, bringing his wife and children to the place where his parents' love story had begun. Isaac and Adelaide lived long lives, blessed with health and happiness and the deep satisfaction of work well done. They saw their grandchildren grow, saw the 20th century dawn with its promises of progress and change, saw Naco transform from a rough border town into a proper community. But through all the changes and all the years, one thing remained constant: their love for each other. It was a love that had been forged in hardship and tested by time, a love that had grown deeper and stronger with every passing year. It was the kind of love that people whispered about, that young couples aspired to, that old couples held up as proof that true love really does exist. When Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70, Adelaide grieved deeply, but found comfort in the knowledge that they had been blessed with 43 years together. She continued living in the house they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, telling stories about the cowboy who had walked into her life one hot August day and changed everything. Adelaide Jensen lived to be 75, and on the day she died, she was surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Isaac had created. Her last words were of him, a whispered "I'll see you soon" that made her children smile through their tears. They buried her next to Isaac in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Naco, under a cottonwood tree that provided shade in the summer heat. The headstone was simple but beautiful, bearing both their names and a single line that summed up their life together: partners in everything. Together forever. And if you visit Naco today, you can still see the old Jensen Hotel, now a historical landmark with its wide porch and cottonwood tree. People say that on quiet evenings, if you listen carefully, you can hear the echo of laughter from long ago, the sound of children playing and parents loving and a life well lived. They say you can feel the love that built that place, the love that transformed it from a failing boarding house into a legacy that lasted generations. It all started with cracked and bleeding hands, with a cowboy who chose kindness, with 2 people who found each other in the harshness of the desert and created something beautiful. It started with a simple act of compassion and grew into a love story that would be told and retold, a testament to the power of caring for another person, of seeing someone's pain and choosing to help. Adelaide and Isaac's story became legend in Naco, passed down through the generations as proof that love can bloom even in the hardest soil, that kindness can change the course of a life, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single choice to care. Their descendants still live in Arizona, carrying forward the legacy of hard work, compassion, and enduring love that Adelaide and Isaac built together all those years ago. And somewhere in whatever lies beyond this world, Adelaide and Isaac are together still, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love eternal and unbreakable, a light that will never fade.